So, good morning, everybody. I think it's time to start our webinar today. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar session, Introduction to Asian Language Markets and Languages. First question, is everybody able to hear me? Maybe you could just give a short feedback via the chat module. So, can you hear me? Just a short feedback, please. Okay. Okay, should be fine. So, just for you to know who is speaking currently, my name is Vanessa Hilton, and I'm the team leader of the Across LSP team. So for that reason, it is today my pleasure to moderate the session and, of course, to introduce our guest speaker, Don Shin, the CEO of One Stop Asia. Don has started his career as a translator and interpreter for the US Army before he founded a small translation business in 1995. For the first years, he focused primarily on the translation of English books and movies. In 2001, Don moved the company's headquarters to LA, where he officially started One Stop Asia Translation US. Today, One Stop Asia is one of the largest Asian language specialists providing full-scale services in all the languages of the Asian markets. So we really have a specialist of the Asian market here today, which is great. And I think we will get a lot of insights and information regarding this market. Before I now hand over to Don, just some general information. The session will be, of course, recorded. And, of course, you are invited to ask questions anytime. So for Don, it is no problem that you ask a question during the presentation already. And he will be glad to answer them as far as is possible. So, and this is the moment. Don, it's your turn.
Yeah. Thank you for a nice introduction, Vanessa. Hello, fellow colleagues in translation industry. My name is Don Shin, and as I introduced, I'm owner of a translation company doing Asian languages. So today, I'm honored to speak about my languages and the Asian markets, but unfortunately, when you hear the topic Asian languages and market and register for this webinar, each of you probably had your own questions or expectations. But as you may agree, this topic itself is too wide to be covered within just 30 minutes. You may imagine you are asked to speak about European languages in just like 30 minutes. And also, so I will try to repeat these general instructions. I try not to repeat those general instructions you can find from Wikipedia or the other internet resource. Instead, I will try to pick some small topics you may need to know to handle these languages. And I will try to finish my presentation within about 30 or 40 minutes from now and get as many questions as possible from you, the audience, so that I can cover those each individual's questions And as Vanessa just said, please feel free to type your questions while you are listening to my presentations. I can see those questions, and I will try to cover as much as possible while I do the presentation, and also save some to answer after separately after the presentations. So when I prepare for this presentation, I mainly had two goals in my mind. I understand that we have the mix of the industry clients, the end clients, and also we have here some TSP clients from the translation service providers. For the end clients, I want to, this presentation is to introduce how different the Asian languages markets and which language you should prepare first and which language next. For the TSP clients, I want to focus on what should you ask to clients when they ask about Asian languages to you. So that in mind, the first question, very often my client asks me, hey Don, I need Chinese translation. And if I ask, hey, which Chinese? They just say, just Chinese. If I explain them there are more than one Chinese and you need to know at least whether that's simplified or traditional, they say, can you do just Chinese? If I explain them, so, and then, or just standard Chinese. If I explain them more, they really feel anxious. If I come back and ask them now, they will think I do not know anything about Chinese. Then I teach them, don't worry, just ask them. I will do the Chinese translation, but for more accurate tone and style, may I ask you what is your main target and uses? Then they will not think you are ignorant, but appreciate you for asking. Yes, this may not be the majority of the case, and most PMs knows well enough to the extent like there are two Chinese. Simplified Chinese is for mainland China, and the rest is traditional Chinese. And they think that's all they need to know, and they know all about everything about Chinese. Well, this may be correct, but it's not enough in many cases, especially if you are a localization specialist. You need to know a lot more than that. So at the first part of my presentation regarding Asian languages, I will give you a little more interesting stories about different versions of Chinese. I believe if you can explain this well at your next client presentations, they will really feel and regard you as a real Asian specialist. Let's see. Now, the step number one is to distinguish spoken languages and writing system. When you say languages, the spoken language and its writing system is different. For example, in English, the official language of UK is written in writing system called alphabet, right? So most of these confusion regarding Chinese comes from forgetting this very simple principle. Firstly, let's talk about the spoken languages in China. There are a lot of different spoken languages in China. Many people think just two languages, two Chinese, but actually there are, according to different scholars, the number is approximately in the range of 150 to 292. Among them, 25 languages have more than 1 million speakers. And the official view of the China government of the late 1960s was that there are about exactly 54 languages, 54 officially announced languages. Some of them are, but here, some of them are totally different languages in different language groups, like Uyghur, Tibetan, Cantonese, Mandarin, Korean, Mongolian, and Hmong. Those are totally different languages groups, and they are included in totally different language groups, and they can't understand each other at all. A lot of people think that those different Chinese are just the dialects and they can understand each other, so it doesn't matter which Chinese you choose. But actually, it's not the case. For example, you see here the Uyghur speakers. If you see here to the north and western part of China, Uyghur speakers, you may hear that these are they are nomadics. And actually this Uyghur language is more close to the Turkish rather than Chinese. They cannot communicate with Chinese Mandarin speakers at all, while they can communicate with the Turkish without interpreters. And if you see the other side in east, you will see Korean at the top. This is the same Korean as Koreans speak. And naturally, they cannot communicate with Mandarin speakers. And there are more than few millions of Chinese who has the Korean as their mother tongue and learn Chinese as the second language. And China government is very flexible in language policies. They allow and even encourage them to keep each authentic groups keep the languages, and they have the broadcasting companies or the publishing companies and schools totally spoken and written in those languages. For example, if you go to the Korean autonomy area in the Manchuria, you will see Koreans first above the Chinese signs everywhere in the street. So, but still some languages are dialects and they can understand each other, but many are different. And among all these languages, the most spoken language certainly is called Mandarin. You see the main part of the majority, the main central part of China, they speak only Mandarin. And this is the official language of the country China and also Taiwan. And the Mandarin is also called Hanwi or Zhongwen. So Hanwi, Zhongwen, Chinese, and Mandarin, those are actually the same languages we are talking. So when we say Chinese, now you know that in most cases we are talking about Mandarin, but actually there are more than hundreds of other Chinese languages. And both you can say, so when you say, there are only one Chinese and it's Mandarin, that may be correct too, because that's the only official languages spoken in China. But at the same time, you can say there are more than hundreds of Chinese, or at least 25 Chinese, or 50-some Chinese, that's also correct. But if you say, Chinese are just two, there are simplified Chinese or traditional Chinese, that's the only two. You can choose either one. Then it's totally wrong, actually. So first, to start with, when we speak with spoken language, let's say that if you believe there are two Chinese, it's wrong. And also here, the second most well-known Chinese language is Cantonese. Here you see at the southern end of the yellow one, it's called Yue, and also it's the different name of Cantonese. Now this is another well-known Chinese language next to Mandarin. And some PMs believe that Cantonese is just another name of Chinese, or it's a slightly different dialect of Chinese. And I guess one of the main reasons is in UK and the other European countries, many Chinese will say they are Chinese and they speak Cantonese. So some people just understand Cantonese as another name of Mandarin. But actually, it's totally different languages from Mandarin. Mandarin speakers and Cantonese speakers, as I said, like Uyghur or Koreans, they can't understand each other at all. Or some may think Cantonese is the language spoken in Hong Kong, not in mainland. But if you see the map here, Hong Kong is very small part here where my course is located, and a lot around those Hong Kong in mainland there are also Mandarin and Cantonese speakers. And so not only there are also in Macau, Malaysia, Singapore, and even in Thailand, there are many Cantonese US speakers. So again, when you have interpreting jobs, you may be asked to provide a Cantonese speakers or the Hakka or Hmong speakers. Then you have to understand that not every Chinese speakers can do that languages or communicate with your client. So if your client was asking Cantonese and you provide, okay, Cantonese is probably the same with Mandarin or a little different dialects, they cannot communicate with your customers at all. And next, now let's move to writing system. Originally, Chinese had only one writing system called Hanzi. Hanzi is one of the oldest writing systems in the world that dates back as much as 5,000 years. And as many of you know, this writing system is a logogram, that is, a character generally represents one syllable of spoken language, Chinese, and maybe a word on its own, or part of a polysyllable word. In other words, each character has different meaning and sound. If you see the top characters on the screen here, let's see, here, the top characters, you may figure what each character means. From left to right, the first character here, what it looks like. It's sun. And next one is moon. The next is mountain, water, and this is the animal sheep. And next is horse. So these characters from 5,000 years ago, when it goes, it changes like to the bottom. So this sun sign become these characters, and they really read as law. And this moon sign becomes the character at the bottom called Yue. And Hua is fire, and next is water. So this is the Chinese writing system. So, and because of this, historically, this one writing system has been shared by many languages. That's something different from the writing system based on sound. Because this one writing system is based on the meanings rather than sound, this can be shared by different languages. Not only some Chinese dialects, but also totally different language groups shared this writing system. So like Korean or Japanese, Cantonese, they all shared this one writing system, although their language was totally different. And still in Japanese, as you could see, majority of the characters are written in Chinese, although they can be written in Japanese characters. And one very interesting thing, especially for European, is that when they are written in Chinese, even though they can't read the sound, they can understand. For example, if you have to have these characters, you don't know how it sounds in Chinese because Koreans or Japanese has their own sounds, but the meaning remains the same, so you can understand. So, for example, as a Korean myself, even if I can't speak Chinese, I can understand about 60 to 80% of Chinese or Japanese signs when I travel these countries. So, because Chinese writing system was logogram, it could have hundreds of different language speakers to communicate each other without learning to the other's languages. But there were very big hitch. As a logogram, you need to keep inventing new characters for each new things or concept. So eventually you need to learn thousands and thousands of characters, and each characters become more and more complex, like the example is shown in the screen. This is one character, and it takes like minutes to just write one character, and you have to learn thousands of these. They cause a lot of troubles for the language learners. So you need to learn about 2,000 different characters to understand the document for normal life, and it takes you years to learn. So starting 19th century, some scholars started to invest to limit the numbers of characters and simplify structure. And when Chinese Communist Party win the war with National Party and take over the mainland China in 1950, they announced they simplified the Chinese writing system. Since then, in mainland China, simplified Chinese writing system became the standard writing system. As you can see in this picture, the character to the left is the traditional. This character becomes simplified to simplified format, and this character becomes simplified. And it's easier to learn and also faster. And at the same time, they limited the numbers of characters used in normal document or textbook, so that people do not need to learn too many languages, too many characters. But because this one was oriented and it started from the Communist Party, entire Taiwan, which was built by National Party, who was defeated by Communist Party, they are not recognized. They don't recognize new simplified writing system and stick to the old traditional writing system. At that time, Hong Kong was under British government too, so they also did not adopt the new writing system. Except the mainland China, the only other country followed and accepted China government was Singapore. So mainland China and Singapore became the only two countries they write the Chinese using the simplified Chinese system. Now, if you combine these two blocks, you can get the pictures. First, regarding the spoken languages, there is only one standard Mandarin and hundreds of the other spoken languages in China. For example, in Hong Kong, Cantonese is the main language, and in Taiwan, it's Minnan or Hakka is the spoken languages in the street, although they learn standard Mandarin in school. So in school, they speak in standard Mandarin, but when you speak with your friends or relatives or family at home, they speak Minnan. It's same with the Hong Kong. And in countries like Malaysia, it's a little more complicated because in Malaysia, there are three ethnic groups, basically, Indians, Malaysian, and Chinese. And those Indians are actually, they use not Hindi, but Tamil. The most of them are Tamil speakers. And Malaysians, they speak Malaysian. And the Chinese in Malaysia, actually most of them speak Hakka. It's again, another language, totally different from Mandarin. So it's similar to Minnan, the Taiwanese language. And in Singapore, it's very similar with Malaysia. So they speak Cantonese and Hakka, but while Malaysia still lived the Chinese, do not recognize Chinese as official languages, but in Singapore, they, just like mainland China, they adopted the two bilingual education system. So each different ethnic groups use their required to learn their own languages and English at the same time. And also in the USA or other Southeast Asian countries, there are mixed. Some speak Cantonese, some speak Hakka, some speak Mandarin. So you have to understand that it's not just one language. And within what, so again, there is one standard Chinese Mandarin, and in addition to that, there are many other languages. But within Mandarin, just like Arabic or Spanish, there is slightly different variations in countries or regions. So just when you ask Chinese translations, just like saying, so when you ask a Chinese translator, just like saying European Spanish, Mexican Spanish, or Chile Spanish, you need to specify which Chinese. Is it whether this is the standard for, are you looking for the mainland China, or are you going to Taiwanese? Then if you go to Taiwanese, you may not, still, you may not require to translate into Minnan or Hakka, but still those Chinese is different from the mainland China, especially in IT industry or technical industry, they use totally different terms. So you have to be very careful not to use the same Chinese. So again, and in the example I said at the introduction, you should not say just the Chinese. You have to make it clear that whether your customer is looking, are going to use this translation in Taiwan, Hong Kong, or Malaysia, or in many cases we do a lot of jobs doing for the Chinese community within USA. And as you can see, the Chinese community within USA, because they have so mixed populations from Cantonese speakers, Hakka speakers, and within the standard Chinese, you may have people from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, or Indonesia, or mainland China. You have to choose very careful words to be understood by all those speakers. So at the same time, most of Chinese speakers still understand the standard Chinese called Mandarin. And also, one other thing very interesting is when you translate into English, you have to understand, you have to ask them where the original source Chinese come from. For example, I do not want to go too deep today, but at least for the words for the Hong Kong is actually the pronunciation of Cantonese pronunciation. If you show these characters, the name Hong Kong, show to the mainland speakers, they read it as a Shangang, which is totally different. It's not only for the name of the city or location. It's the same with the name of the people or organizations or mountain, river, street, city. All these names can be different. So let's say if you are translating a passport, if you don't tell us or which country this passport is issued, we don't know how to spell that correctly. We may come up with totally different spellings. And even if it's not just a normal standard document issued from mainland China, but if you have the name of people's name who's Taiwanese, maybe the English writing and sound of this Chinese is Taiwanese is different from the Chinese. So let's wrap up. So when you deal with Chinese, you have to remember Mandarin is the standard Chinese. It is correct. So when you say Chinese, mostly it's Mandarin. And within Mandarin, there are some variations in different regions or countries. And regarding writing system is related to the government. So regardless which dialects or the languages you translate, writing system belongs to the government. So you have to tell, like, hey, I need a translation. Instead of just saying, hey, I need just the Chinese, you have to ask, I need a Chinese translation for Taiwanese market. And you can leave it to us to decide whether then it can be a traditional Chinese or a simplified Chinese. And also what kind of tones or styles you can use. And also, so you always ask which market your customers want to go and how they are going to use that. For example, they may want just one Chinese that can be used in whatever country. Then probably we will ask you to use a standard traditional Chinese, international standard Chinese written in traditional writing system. So, and for into English, please confirm where the source is from. So now the rest of about 15 minutes, I would like to talk about the other languages. Why Asia? First, why Asia? It's because the population is growing and many other YouTubes. So you see, this is the language of the chart of the languages divided by the number of speakers. And here, these bright colored are all Asian languages. Chinese is definitely the biggest. And next to Vietnamese has about 67 million, Tamil, Hindi, and Telugu. This is another Indian languages. And Javanese is a dialect of the Indonesian. So Malay, Bahasa, Japanese. If you include all those Asian languages, that already become more than 50% of the total speakers living in the world. You can see the populations. Right at the present, there are more than 60% living in Asia, and it will be about 55 in 2050. And Asia was traditionally the majority of the total world economy until just about 100 years ago. And now, starting about late 1980s, it starts to pick up again, and it will be the majority very soon. So by 2025, it becomes bigger than the America and Western Europe combined. So, you know, you may think Asian is just a minority, but actually it's the majority, not only in the numbers of people, but also in the size of the market. And if you see the future, it's becoming more evident that Asia is not just a small part of the world. If you see this chart, 2050 rankings of the market is all covered by many Asian countries. The biggest European country in here is number 10 in UK. Number 9, Germany, and UK, 10 in UK. Even if you combine German and UK together, if you combine the other Asian languages, it becomes like almost 100 times bigger than the UK and Germany. And another interesting is those Asian countries are the fastest growing countries. If you see the chart to the right of this chart, you see that Vietnam, India, China, Indonesia, Turkey, Korea, those Asian countries are the fastest growing economy in the world too. So here, I cannot cover all those languages, but I want to group them in 4 different groups. One is the existing major markets, and the other one is emerging markets. And there are some English-spoken countries. In other words, you may not really require to translate into these languages because they speak English. And also there are some minor languages. The first, one of the main, the biggest market is China and Chinese. When you deal with China and Chinese, few things I want you to remember. One is China is not the only one market or one country. As I explained before, there are many places and over 60 million of Chinese are living outside overseas. And they form a far-flung diaspora that extends from San Francisco to Singapore with an estimate of wealth of more than 1.5 trillion. They consist what could arguably be called the third largest economy in the world after the gross national products of the United States and Japan. Writing in Harvard Business Review, John Carl alluded to the eventual emergence of Chinese Commonwealth. So there are many sub-markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, and even in a country like Indonesia, Chinese are less than 1%, but actually they own the majority of the money in Indonesia, and they are the biggest decision makers in many areas. And another thing you have to understand about China is it's really competitive and hard to survive. It's just one global, it's another world. And there you will see all these big, strong competitors. And even if you believe you are the biggest one in your country or in your languages, it can be very easily just mixed with all the rest of big brands, and it's very hard and competitive to survive. You may remember that even Google or Walmart, they could not survive in the China market, although they are the biggest out of China. And also, there are a lot of big demands, and the good thing about the translation industry is that there is also a very big supply, and well-trained people you can easily find in Chinese languages. And next is Japan. Japan is still one of the biggest markets, the third biggest market in the world after the USA and China. And it's one thing about Japan, if you have experience in dealing with Japanese projects, you may agree that Japanese customers are one of the most difficult customers to deal with. I heard some similar stories about French customers, but among our world in Asian languages, Japanese is always the most difficult languages to satisfy customers. It's not only because of their mentality or their requirement. You have to understand that in Japan, the environment is totally different. If you have, let's say, if you have a small typo when you sell, let's say, cell phone or the computers, if there is a small typo or not clear writings in your manuals, most in other countries, it's no big deal. But in Japan, it can be a big problem. The consumers may call and complain, hey, what the hell are you doing? And within the company, it can take a very serious defect of that whole company. And it can regard it as a shame of the company, and the people who was in charge of that project may have a big trouble. And also, the language itself is very different. When I say Japanese, I sometimes say that it is more important than how to say rather than what to say. In Japanese, let's say, if you heard one Japanese speaker say, Yeah, thank you very much for your kind introduction or proposal. I will think of it very seriously and return to you soon. You may be delighted to hear that, but actually that means just no. But if you say just no instead of all those long neutralized sentences, in Japan, you may be very disappointed, or this is very unpolite. So you have to say just sounds like yes, even though when you say no. So it's very important, not just delivering the meanings, but you have to deliver in the right tone. And sometimes you have to change the words and change the fact even at some point. So that's why in Japanese it's very difficult to find the right tone. And you also have to let the translators know exactly when and where the language will be written. Korean is another unique language in the existing market. And this is very dynamic and trendy market. And these days it's becoming the cultural center of Asia. So because of this dynamic and very trendy market, it's very good for the testing bed. So when I have some end clients who is asking, hey Don, where should I go first? I want to go to Asia. I know the market is huge, but we don't have experience, and I don't know how the Asians will accept our products or services. Then very often I ask them to, why don't you try Korean first as a testing? It has a lot of advantages. First, Korean consumers are very fast in accepting new things and new concepts, and they will quickly. Maybe in Japan, it may take 1 year to get the reactions, but in Korea, within just a couple of months, you can see whether they like or not, or they will accept or reject the ideas or products. And also, once it's accepted and popular within Korea, it's very easy that other Asians know about that too. And when you deal with, but another thing, when you deal with Asian, their analytic Korean, their analytic system and tones are very important again, especially Korean. It's same with Japanese too, but mostly in Korean. For example, the same word, rice, their main food, rice, can have 5 different names according to the situation. You cannot exchange those words. When you are talking with the rice eaten by the king, you have to use the right term. If you use different term, it can be a very ignorant people. So in many cases, you have to know exactly, even 1 year's difference. If I'm 51 and I'm talking to a people who is 2 years older than me, I have to use different analytic system. So if you don't know the relationship between those speakers and listeners or the situations where you are speaking, you cannot even start a translation. So again, generally in Asian languages, it's better. It helps a lot to give the translators the information, environmental information, or the situational information regarding the jobs. And there are other Asian emerging markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. Those languages, I recommend those languages when if you have a small budget, but you want to deal with the market in the long run, I recommend those emerging languages. That's because you see, Indonesia is the fourth biggest population. Still, it's regarded as a very small market. And it will be, as I showed previously, that Indonesian market itself will be bigger than Germany or UK in the long run. And it's one of the fastest growing markets. And another thing you have to understand is that the contents of those languages are very limited. So, for example, let's say if you translate into Spanish, then there are a lot of Spanish contents, but if this is the number of articles in Wikipedia, there are less than 100,000 articles in Thai, while they have a lot of speakers in those Asian languages. So if you translate, if you can choose only a handful of languages, maybe if you translate into these minor but growing emerging market languages, you have a lot more return on investment. And there are some English-speaking countries, Philippines, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore. In these countries, English is one of the official languages. They were educated and spoken in most business. But one thing I want to warn you is that doesn't mean that you don't need to localize your products or services into these languages. I see in many cases, people, they love to buy from the product or service they have the languages. So even though they all can read and speak English, Filipinos buy more services and the products if it's written in Tagalog. And I see recently some of our customers spend a little money to localize into Tagalog or Malaysian, got a very amazing returns on the investment. So still, this is something you may consider. And then there are minor languages. So this is what I prepared. So if there is any other questions.
Yes, there is one question I can see, or rather three. I think I read them loud so that everybody can hear them. Are there any general rules for translating abbreviations into simplified Chinese when translating graphical user interface of a software? This is the first question. The second one, should abbreviations stay in English if there isn't enough space for Chinese translation?
I think those questions are somewhat related.
Yes.
First, regarding interface, I'd like to recommend two things. Number one, it's more about the internationalization. Regarding the volumes or the length or number of words translated, in Germany, I believe that if you translate into German, it expands about minimum 20% or 25%. In Chinese, it shrinks as little as like 50%, or at maximum, I would say about 70% or 80%. So you don't have to worry about the length that much. You may just worry rather too much space is left after you do the localization into Asian language, Chinese especially. But one thing you have to remember is, please do not consider to increase the fonts if possible. Because as I show you in the screen, Chinese character has so many strokes. Sometimes it can. So if it's written, compare, with just the alphabets. You can read, you have no problem reading just the 5 points alphabets, but if you write Chinese in 5 points, it's hard to read. So even though it's the same font size, actually Chinese characters or Asian characters are a little bigger, about 10% bigger than English alphabets. So I want to make sure that do not make your font size too little, and also consider to expand the font size only in Asian languages, because you don't have to worry too much about the space. And simplified Chinese, the question was simplified Chinese TTP, or what is that? Interface?
Of a software.
Oh, software.
Yes.
Yeah, software. No, remaining is in English word. Well, in Chinese, it depends on, but generally, I don't recommend to leave in English that much. That's the mentality, or even all those medical, for example, in very specialized field like medical or software or pharmaceutical. In many other Asian countries, they just use the English terms, and it's easier. But in China and Japan, they have all those very specialized terms in their own languages, and they prefer to use that. So very often, the Chinese doctors, they don't speak English that much because they all learn using the Chinese textbook. In Korean, most of the doctors, they learn from English textbook, and they prefer, when it comes to very specialized terms, they prefer English terms rather than Korean, but not in China or Japan.
Okay, many thanks. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think this is not the case. Of course, you're invited to send further questions if there are some just after the session. It's no problem at all. Yeah, I think it's time now to end the session. Thanks a lot, Don, for that great session, that great, interesting session. I think we had the opportunity to learn a lot about the Asian market, and it'll be great to talk about it in future and to learn all these kind of things. Just from my side, check our webinar space on our website. There are of course further webinars as well. Very interesting, and I'd like to invite you to take part. So there is just one last question, if it's possible to get the slides. Of course it is possible. We will send them to all of you after the session. No problem at all. Okay, then it's time for me to say goodbye.
Bye, and thank you very much. And I left my email on the screen, so feel free to email me if you have any questions regarding Asian languages.
Exactly. So
thank you.
Many thanks. So I got the feedback directly. Thanks, Don. Very positive feedback. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.